Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called A Rocky Start, written by Heathbourne. One might say that we got off to a rocky start. When the decidedly artificial radio signals were first registered, first contact protocols snapped into effect at once. Degradation levels indicated a time span since they were first emitted, ranging from several decades to a few centuries. Nothing surprising there, so we went ahead with the normal process. As per protocol, a full contingent of scientific, diplomatic, and military personnel was assembled in that order. Maybe the civilization behind the signals was already gone by the time we heard their call, burned away by their own new toys. In our experience, this was not uncommon. Civilians rise and fall, but by the time a civilization discovers radio, nuclear fission is usually not far off. After that, apocalyptic warfare often follows. But if the newcomers were gone, we would at least make sure to document what remained. Several whole library habitats, in fact, were set aside to host the results of past such missions, the memories of the species long gone. Maybe they had developed peacefully. On occasion, the civilization would advance their technology gradually, gently, carefully working their way forward until they hit radio. These, the more pragmatic civilizations, made up the backbone of the galactic community. Theirs was the path that we ourselves chose before we arose from the dirt, before we set forth to stride between the stars. And if this new civilization was the same persuasion, our diplomats would be there to allay any concerns, to bring them into the fold and welcome them as equals. But then again, maybe not. There have been some rare few occasions in recorded history of civilizations going down a third route. After the first, we always made sure to pack soldiers on the welcome wagon. So according to protocol, we had our best and brightest scientists, our kindest and most understanding diplomats, and the fiercest warriors we could get to work together, all mustered together on a cruiser-sized government ship, which promptly exploded upon exiting warp above the radio-emitting planet. They literally never knew what hit them. There was no time for evasive maneuvers, nor did emergency kinetic shields have a chance to power up before disaster struck. Even the tertiary sensor readings went dark milliseconds after entering real space, so at least our people died quickly. As I said, a rocky start. Everyone was caught by surprise. Some of our people at first believed that we might have found an exceedingly aggressive species, someone who would react to a large unknown ship by immediately blowing it away, unconcerned with who might have sent it or why. But such a level of xenophobic aggression, we thought, made no sense. First, it would indicate a mindset where you believe yourself superior to everything outside yourself, even when you have no knowledge of the proverbial facts on the ground. This attitude, in and of itself, would not only be detrimental to developing advanced technology, it would be detrimental to basic survival. Across all known worlds, even apex predators in their habitat know better than to attack something new and unknown at literal first sight. Second, from a sociological point of view, even if they could survive, such aggression was entirely antithetical to developing technology more advanced than stone tools. Across all of the galaxy's combined libraries, we checked. There were many references to super hostile civilizations. Exactly 0 of them had advanced beyond the Paleolithic stage. We spent months deliberating what might have been behind the event, but in the end, we decided it must have been an enormous misunderstanding. Perhaps this new civilization had somehow gone interplanetary, and our ship, purely by chance, had dropped in the midst of some savage intercennine battle. Or maybe for some insane reason, these people had mined their own heavens. So we decided to try again. The loss of our first craft was felt across known space, so we decided to try a safer approach, outrageously outside of protocol, on our second run. There would be no scientists, and a small diplomatic contingent was comprised of a decidedly hawkish group. The military complement, on the other hand, was significantly larger. And rather than a single cruiser, we opted for an unmistakable show of force, whoever these idiots were, and regardless of it all possibly being a misunderstanding, we would put them thoroughly in their place. The troops were distributed across 3 cruisers, which alone would be more than enough to intimidate any galactic player, to say nothing of its impact on some backwater interplanetary civilization. But we wanted to be sure, so we threw in an escort of 6 grand cruisers, 2 battleships, and a carrier as well. It was a battle group sufficient to take on a small empire, and we jumped it into orbit around the 4th orbital of their sun, one out of their home planet, just to be sure they had time to see what they were up against. But I did note that everyone was caught by surprise. That includes our new friends down at the planet, and as it turned out, they had never attacked our vessel. They were simply living in a garbage dump, and our welcome wagon jumped straight into their trash compactor. We had known that there was a theoretical possibility of a civilization like theirs arising, a 4th road, someone advancing quickly enough to get to both fusion and spaceflight within the time it took us to learn of their existence, but still peaceful enough that they would do so without blowing themselves into oblivion before we could reach them. What we had not anticipated was the amount of litter such a civilization might create. Our ship had jumped straight into a patch of 2nd and 3rd stage booster rockets and other trash, discarded in orbit like it was no big deal. 8 billion metal fragments, the remnants of older chemical rocket launchers, and a string of commercial communication satellites were all launched in the midst of the debris. The sheer volume of clutter meant our first crew of people never stood a chance. So when our reinforced battle group jumped into orbit around the place called Mars, the natives were already in a frenzy. Our ill-fated cruiser, we later found out, had appeared in a flash of light in the night sky over a place called Europe. The panicking natives, suddenly awake to the fact that they were not alone in the universe, had gone right up to haul as much wreckage as they could back to their planet-side research labs. And so, what had previously been a ragtag band of some 10 billion savages, with a few extraplanetary expeditions and a single lunar habitat under their belt, were now somehow a shielded, warp-capable civilization with long-range artillery under their command, courtesy of us. Great. We had to hand it to them. Their reverse engineering skills were most impressive. Our choice of diplomats for the 2nd mission, on the other hand, turned out to be less so. The thing is, these humans, as they called themselves, had been on the verge of total collective self-immolation on numerous occasions in the past. In 3 separate instances, just in the 1st century after discovering radio, their world had come within literal seconds of joining the multitudes of civilizations across the galaxy, which had played with fire and gotten terminally burnt. There was even warfare taking place on the ground right up to the moment when our ship blew up in their sky. In short, they were a far cry from the peace-loving pacifists that we had theorized a 4th road civilization would necessarily be. And now they had skipped several generations of technological development. Worse yet, they had found common cause in defending themselves against an alien, against us. Ridiculous, of course. We were entirely peaceful, although in hindsight, that might not have been made entirely obvious to them by the appearance of our empire-destroying battle group in their solar system. The fact that our carefully selected diplomats then went on to broadcast what, in essence, translated into submit or die, did not help matters. The rocky start immediately got a whole lot rockier. To their credit, they did not immediately open fire. This, as it turned out, was lucky for all parties. Here I must emphasize that the humans turned out to not only be remarkably adept at reverse engineering our technology, they were also a rather impressively industrious sort. I briefly mentioned long-range artillery. In the time it took us to decide upon a course of action, assemble the right team, gather a fleet, and deploy it to their system, they had been quite busy indeed. Unbeknownst to us, and quite incomprehensibly, they had assembled an enormous mass driver on the surface of their moon. The beginnings of an orbital defense ring was in place around their planet, already bristling with weapons. Later simulations conclude that our forces would have won the day in the event of a battle, but at the likely cost of all 9 capital ships. Militarily, such a loss would have sent us reeling. Politically, it might have fractured the galactic community. The humans, naturally given their nature, even have terms for this. In their words, we would have suffered a Pyrrhic victory. But battle was not joined. Instead, they sent out a reply. It was a single word: no. Such brazen defiance was enough to give the military leadership of our expedition pause. Ignoring the protests of the hawkish diplomats, they held the fleet's position around Mars long enough to bring word of the situation to leadership back home. The rest, as they say, is history. It took time, of course, to smooth out the creases from our rocky start. Months were spent simply convincing the humans that we really came in peace, all while they kept expanding their armaments on their orbital ring. Their hesitancy to believe us, especially in light of our first actual message to them, was of course no surprise. But we put in the hours and eventually they came to believe us. And yet, years went by before we had built enough trust to actually integrate them into the wider galactic community. But they were years well spent. In the end, they were on board, contributing actively to the sciences and to the manufacturing processes of the whole galaxy. We soon learned that their speed in understanding our technology, then manufacturing it on a grand scale, had been no fluke. Unique amongst the various known species, humans had a natural impulse towards always forging ahead, heedless of protocol, with a kind of dogged determination to just get stuff done. Combined with their preference for violence, we should not have been surprised to see them pick apart our cruisers' weapons and reproduce them on a larger scale. All of this took place centuries ago, and in the time that has followed, the galaxy has become a wealthier, healthier, and more peaceful place. Adding the ingenuity and productivity of humanity to our shared community has turned out to be the single best thing that ever happened to us. As for their militaristic nature, they seem to be happy enough in getting an outlet for that by sending out occasional peacekeeping force whenever unrest starts to brew. More often than not, having a human supercarrier appear in the sky is enough to remind troublemakers that peace is a preferable solution. First contact protocols have also been revised, of course. Not that anyone would believe that we'd run into similar circumstances a second time, but protocols are important to us, even if the humans tend to snicker as we discuss the topic. End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster 117, Casper Arnholtz, Draxzoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.